We're going to be talking a little bit about increasing independence during personal care tasks. And these include a great variety of things. I think it's really helpful to be able to increase some of those independent skills, and we'll get into the whys of it, but I'm sure you guys are all aware of some of the whys of how it would make life easier or better for somebody that you love. Um, so we'll go into a little bit about the what of it. What are personal care tasks? Those things involved with dressing, showering, bathing, for our older guys and women, shaving, grooming pieces like cleaning ears, cutting nails, toothbrushing and flossing, toileting pieces, as well as menstrual care, hair care, eating, and table manners. So it covers a wide variety of tasks. And a lot of these tasks are multiple steps and can be challenging to teach if somebody has some learning differences. A lot of them are multiple steps. There's a lot of pieces involved. There's a lot of skills needed. So when teaching these skills, we might have to make some modifications to teach things in a different way, to increase the learning and then to decrease some of the difficulty in those situations. These tasks are super important. If somebody has poor hygiene, that can limit their social inclusion, that could limit their work opportunities, could strain caregiver relationships, and reduce the amount of independence. There's one person, Peter Gerhardt, he has really devoted a lot of his career to supporting these adaptive skills and these personal care skills. And one of the things he says, we limit people by not thinking they are capable. So we have to kind of change the way that we're thinking and change the way that we think about some of these everyday tasks so that we can include the people that we care for in these tasks a little bit differently. So I think the starting point is often, how do I teach these skills? A lot of kids growing up, if they are typically developing, they see a lot of modeling, they want to do things themselves. We're able to ask them to do things themselves. But it can be really challenging if somebody is not as willing to try new things. It's comfortable for adults or other people around you to do those things for you. So we have to kind of zone in and figure out what to target. And usually what I suggest when we're starting with these skills is to start really small to build confidence in both the learner and the person who's teaching that skill too. Starting with that positive relationship and positive regard for that person is really, really important. It's hard if you're already super frustrated with a particular task to jump in and be teaching these skills that maybe have been really frustrating or challenging for both parties involved. So starting small is the biggest piece of advice for getting started with some of these. And that might mean targeting a small part of a task. It might mean doing something that's more likely for that person, that they have the skill to do it, but they're maybe not as motivated or it's not part of their routine already. There's also an amount of priming involved. I think with a lot of parenting pieces and caregiving pieces, making sure that before we start implementing or decide we're going to do something, being able to talk about it in a really reachable way. And introducing it however a learner might be more willing to accept this task. That could be videos of other people doing the care task, labeling the care task when somebody else is observing that task. And I think about this with toothbrushing a lot. That's one of my favorite ways to start some priming, is to have kids watch videos of people having their teeth brushed. And then there's some like silly songs and things that might be motivating for somebody to watch and think that that task is more fun and more engaging than maybe it actually is. I do that with my own kids too. Care routines can be incredibly challenging. I think of like the bath bedtime scramble in my house, which is usually a pretty hot mess. And thinking of ways that can ease some of those difficult transitions, the difficult requirements of the time too, but also increase some of that independence along the way. We also want to get the learner's input on what's important. And I can't stress this enough with our older kiddos, teenagers, young adults. This is such a critical part, is getting that buy-in piece of what's important, whether it's a teenager who knows how to do the skills, but you have to nag them every step of the way, um, or you feel like they're not doing an adequate job and you have to go back in and help them do things. It's important to have that discussion and learn what the learner thinks is important and what their end goals are as well. Um, and then we're able to kind of bridge that gap a little bit more differently to support them better. For some people, tolerating those tasks might be that first step along the way. I can think of a lot of care tasks that people don't enjoy, especially that toothbrushing, nail clipping, tolerating being in a public bathroom. If you're doing potty training or something along those lines, there's so many different situations that are difficult to tolerate. They're new. There might be some sort of sensory component involved. There might be a novelty piece to it and some fear involved in that. And for these, we have to learn the little tolerance pieces at a time. So if it's something like we want to work on independence with toothbrushing, we might have to take a big jump back and look at that tolerating piece. We want them to be able to maybe touch the toothbrush to their lips to be able to tolerate having a caregiver holding a toothbrush near them and realize that it's not that bad, and practicing those little steps along the way to getting there. The haircuts and the clippers are a big one. I think having something noisy close to your head is really, really aversive for a lot of people. So that can be a really important thing to tolerate, that sound, being around other people, making that sound, and increasing that distance towards a person with hair clippers. These are just a couple examples. There certainly could be other situations that we have to learn to tolerate. I think about potty training too in this situation. I work with so many kids with potty training, and that initial step of like sitting on the toilet. Maybe the toilet seat isn't comfortable for them. Maybe it's a new experience. Maybe they are scared that the toilet's going to splash back at them. There's all sorts of different pieces involved with getting people to tolerate some of those initial getting started pieces that I think are so important and overlooked. And can be really frustrating if you're trying to teach a task and you realize you have to step all the way back. So thinking about those prerequisites and what's going to be important to get started in these tasks is really helpful too. We also have to think about previous learning experiences too. If it's been tried before and they haven't felt successful with something, we might have to go back to that tolerating piece as well. You just never quite know where anxiety might pop in, where you might have a little bit of a difficulty. So it's always okay to go back to this tolerating piece so that we make it an easy experience for people where they're not feeling like it's a really aversive or horrible thing.
Sure, we still have to perform to her. This is our last time performing in front of this tower.
We have some easy tasks to start with. I always want those easy, quick tasks to complete that I think are a really good way to jump in. Some things like being at the table during meal times, wiping your mouth, bringing a plate to the sink after a meal, throwing away garbage, something that's going to be really quick. It's going to be clear that that it's needed to be completed. You have a messy mouth, that's a cue for you that you need to wipe your mouth, or somebody might support you to like guide you to do that, or maybe imitate that skill to do that for somebody. A dirty plate when you're done with your meal, that's a natural cue to bring it to a sink or to put it in a dishwasher. Something like throwing away garbage. I struggle with this in my house with kids who want to help with their nose getting to blow their nose or wipe their nose, and then they like hand you the tissue when they're super, super capable of going over to the trash can by themselves. So that's a great teaching opportunity right there and a natural part of that sequence. I think these are really easy ways to get started with some of these pieces. Putting clothes in the hamper can be another one too. And always making sure that everything is kind of in close proximity with teaching some of these tasks as well. Um, you wouldn't want to have somebody throw away a tissue and ask them to do that when they're like all the way on the other side of the house or not near one. And then it ends up not working out or being a quick or easy task if somebody's on the move or not really willing to participate as much. And we'll talk about different methods for doing some of these pieces as well. So we want to build that confidence early on, keep it quick and simple. We want to provide some praise for trying new things and providing praise for independence and participation in these tasks. And then what I think is also really helpful, if there's multiple people in the home, having all children or individuals in the home participating on that same task. So it could also be like a family meeting type of thing. If it's like a particular chore or different task, part of bath time, maybe with like putting your towel into the hamper after a bath or something like that. That's a great thing to have everybody work on and focus on so nobody feels really singled out. Though there may be some developmental differences, there may be certain things that somebody is behind on and needs some extra support. So that's something to keep in mind as well. One of the best practices is behavior skills teaching. And this is a way where we're providing information about the skill in a specific format so that we're providing information. So we're explaining the skill. So if it's something like, I'll use hand washing, for example. We're going to talk about hand washing. We wash our hands after we use the bathroom. If our hands get messy during a meal, we wash our hands before meals as well. We're going to use soap and water when we do this. We're going to go over to the bathroom and use our step stool. And this is what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to do it. That's the next step. We want to show individuals what we want them to do, that expected behavior. And then 3 comes in with practicing that skill. We want the individual to have a lot of practice with this. It's really easier to teach skills where there's a lot of opportunities for practice. So hand washing is one where there's a lot of opportunities throughout the day. We want to give individuals that opportunity to practice that skill and be able to give some feedback for that skill. And that feedback might be in the moment or after the task. If it's something like a teenager washing their hair independently, that might be something where you kind of have to launch them into that skill and give feedback afterwards, that they didn't get all the spots or they did a really good job rinsing out their shampoo. Some of those pieces might be afterwards. With something like hand washing, if you're able to kind of supervise in that moment, oh, don't forget the soap, or make sure to get all the bubbles off your hands and all of those pieces. That can be in the moment. So there's different ways to provide that feedback to individuals. We typically want to make it in do statements when we're giving some feedback. So we want to tell them what they should be doing, not, oh no, you did it wrong. We want to give them guidance for what they should be doing going forward. So if they soap their hands and go to turn off the sink, what you'd want to do at that point is let's rinse our hands instead of stop doing that. You would want to tell them what to do. Let's rinse our hands. Here we go. And keep the chain of the behaviors flowing as much as possible. And then that's step 5 of using that skill. We don't want to be the only people teaching that skill. So this is a great thing if there's other caregivers involved, if school is involved, to share with your other team of people, whether it's school team or other providers, that this is a skill that should be used. And this is something that we're working on. And these are the steps that are going really well. And these are the steps where this person might have a challenge along the way. And then depending on the individual and the skill, you want to revisit the whole explain the skill and show the skill part as needed. There might need to be some increased discussion about it at first. And then as you kind of go along and the person is becoming more skilled at a certain task, then you want to start fading that feedback and fade some of that priming piece where you're explaining and showing the skill ahead of time. We are going to talk about some of these ones with lots of steps. So we're going to do a quick task analysis. I'm going to give about 30 seconds and have everybody kind of think of mentally or write down all the steps that it takes to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I'm going to pull up a video while we do that. So think of all of the steps that it might take if you were teaching somebody and telling them, this is all of the things that you need to do. The kids do their best to write down these instructions and they end up bumbling it or not giving all of the steps needed. So it's really important when we're thinking about the number of steps in some of these tasks that we might really have to be really deliberate with our instructions. We might have to be really specific. There might be pieces that we do naturally as adults and caregivers and don't really think about some of those steps and how effortful they are. So that's one thing that we're going to keep in mind when we're using these multi-step tasks is writing down all of those steps that might be necessary for an individual in your particular setting, and making sure that we're not missing steps along the way. So one thing to do if you have a really complex task like hand washing, like washing your hair, is writing down all of those steps specific to your house, to your bathroom, or whatever setting it's in, so that you're not missing pieces of instruction. Because when we have these task analyses, it's a number of steps, but each step along the way should be the cue for the next step. So turning on the water, that should be our cue to then put our hands under as we are learning this skill. Then to get the soap, that should be our next cue once our hands are wet. So we want to kind of naturally embed these cues. And it's really important that we know that we're not missing any steps. One example that I like to give is hand washing in particular people's houses versus the school. So sometimes with hand washing, if we're practicing in different settings, that might mean using a hand towel and putting it back on the towel rack. But in a different setting, it might be pushing for the paper towels and then drying our hands and then throwing it away. So we have to kind of vary the instructions for different settings and make sure that we're taking some of those pieces into consideration, because that really can impact the skill. I see a lot of learners, if we don't teach all of those different specific scenarios, then they might just kind of shut down at a particular step. And that problem solving piece can be really challenging. If you learn how to do something in a particular way and then a challenge pops up and you're not really sure what to do, you might just kind of stop completing that task or not really know what to do along the way. So asking for help is also a good skill too to teach if that's not within somebody's learning repertoire already. And I'll send you a link to the video. I have a list of resources that I'm planning to share with you guys after this as well. So some other of the teaching strategies, we talk about these task analyses, and one of the big pieces is chaining forwards or backwards. So you might start really small with things like we talked about, that taking small steps. If doing the whole process of washing hands and maybe there's a visual support, it hasn't been going well, you need a lot of verbal prompts and feel like you're not really achieving that independence, what you might start doing is something called a backwards chain. There's also a forwards chain too, but what you want to start with is that you are doing all of the steps along the way. You're completing all of the steps except for the very last part. So that kid gets, or individual gets, that reinforcing part of completing the task. So that might be drying hands with washing hands and putting it onto the towel rack. Maybe that's their part to do. And then you would gradually go backwards. So once they nail the putting the towel back on the rack, what you might do is teach that previous step. So if that previous step is drying hands and putting the towel on that rack. So you're gradually going back until you get all of the steps, going back to the very beginning of that process, which is turning on the water. And that's a good example with like something like tying your shoes. That reinforcing part of tying shoes might be the best part for somebody to complete. And then you're learning those other steps gradually along the way. You could also do something called forward chaining, which is the exact opposite, where the first skill is what you're starting with. So maybe turning on the water for washing hands. That would be the first step. And then you would increase the number of steps along the way until that person has achieved independence. We talked about earlier, modeling is really helpful with introducing new skills. Video modeling can be a great skill. What I find with a lot of learners is that we as adults, give a lot of verbal prompts and it starts to feel like nagging. And then our friends get completely checked out. They don't want to participate at all. So one thing that I have found really successful with many of my clients is to do a little video modeling, whether it's myself or somebody else showing that skill on a video. So then if they aren't sure which step to do next, you can kind of pull out a video and pull up to the correct spot. I've used this with toothbrushing a lot. I find that it works really well. Um, if you can kind of orient them to like the part of their mouth that they're supposed to with the video instead of just telling them or pointing or showing them. So it gives them a resource to rely on, but not a person with them at all times. So that's a great way to increase independence with some of those pieces too. Picture supports can be really helpful for some individuals. I think of especially schools, there's a lot of visual supports with hand washing, with different procedures at school that can be really helpful. I've used them with showering too, to make some picture reminders to put in the shower, since we want to be as least intrusive as possible with some of those self-care pieces. Is we want to increase that independence, and we want them to not need to hear our voice at all times to complete some of these tasks. I wanted to bring in some of the support people that are around you. Can some of these pieces be added as IEP goals? Oftentimes they can. Whether it's an actual goal to support something like hand washing, independence in the bathroom, independence during meal times, these are some pieces that we can include in an IEP. It could also be something that's layered in supplemental aids and services, which I think can be really helpful for many people who have learned the skill but need to practice it in a different situation. And then also coordinating with the teachers. I think teachers see a different side of the kids that we work with, or their care providers, whoever it might be. They get to do things in a different way than we might think to do, and kids just act a little bit different at school. So they might have some different strategies for working on some of those skills in a slightly different way. And it's always really good to just be on the same page and know what other people are working on, and if we're seeing more independence in one setting, how we can adjust that to another setting. OT, a lot of these skills can also be addressed in OT. OT focuses a lot on teaching planning skills. So I think this is a natural setting that many OTs work with. There's also many fine motor tasks involved that may be impacted. So it's really great to get OT support with some of these tasks as well, or to find a different way to adapt a kid's needs to that particular task. And we mentioned with the tolerating piece earlier, addressing sensory concerns related to that task. So if they might have a different strategy for how to tolerate in a different way, or to kind of gradually add in some of those pieces. They might have a different suggestion for toothbrushing or something like that, a different type of toothbrush, a different type of toothpaste. There's all sorts of different supports related to it that other providers can help with as well. And I wanted to kind of open the floor up at this point to ask what questions that you guys have, to hear about some of the challenges that you might be experiencing. I also wanted to say it's never too late to start teaching these skills for hygiene and independence. I know in my own household, it can be really difficult to get through the day. So you want to kind of get through some of these routines, and then you've realized you haven't taught skills that maybe you should have been teaching all along. I think we all have that kind of self-reflection as parents of like, oh gosh, did I just miss a really important opportunity? But there are always more opportunities to kind of support and practice these skills. I also have some resources that we can get to as well. I think this book, it's called Taking Care of Myself. The one with the green cover is the one I'm most familiar with. Um, it takes some of the anxiety of parenting and caregiving, the language that we use for talking about some of these personal care tasks. This focuses more for teenagers, but I think there's a lot of pieces that work for younger kids as well. And I think it could work for young adults with um, a variety of needs as well. And it kind of gives the language for a lot of different things. It could be something like wiping after taking a bowel movement. It goes into showering, hand washing, all of those pieces, and kind of gives a really nice language of what to say. And having a script as parents, I think, helps us to be able to teach some of these tasks as well and know the right language to use. This is an updated one. I haven't had a chance to look at this yet, but I did see when I searched Amazon that there is a second edition. And this one talks a little bit beyond that capacity. It talks about relationships and sex. So this might be like the next version of for teenagers and young adults in particular. And I'm going to put all of these resources together to send out to you, but I also have, there's some checklists. So if you're wondering, what kind of skills is my kid maybe should we be focusing on for their particular age or where they are developmentally? So there's different resources to pull from with some of those pieces. And I think they can be really helpful for narrowing some of those skills. I have a 4-year-old, so I was looking at it recently and like all of the little pieces that perhaps I'm not pushing as much as I should or should be like thinking about targeting. So it kind of helps with some of those planning pieces.